I have great optimism for the states that have embraced education freedom and school choice. And I'm really excited about what the next 5 to 10 years are going to hold for families who are looking for something better and different for their kids.
And welcome back to The Narrative. Aaron Baer, David Mahan. I promise to you that Mike Andrews still works here at least some of the time. Mm-hmm. On occasion, he shows up to work. But
what'd I tell you?
But he is on. This time, he actually is on vacation, which is well earned, and we're grateful for him. And we miss him. I'm sure you miss him more than we miss him, because somebody needs to try to. Even as we were trying to prep for this segment, we have a lack of brain cells around here right now. And so, Mike, wherever you are, please come back soon. We actually just had a wonderful conversation with Betsy DeVos. She was just in town here in Columbus on the Our Bodies, Our Sports tour. And it was a great bus tour. It came through with all of these female athletes that had either been forced to compete against men and in different athletic competitions all over the country. And Betsy DeVos, really stepping in and lending her voice. She's known more for the school choice issue, but she's really leaned in on the Title IX conversation, and it's been a really powerful force for it. And I think you'll enjoy the conversation just from the context of her giving that inside perspective of the Federal Department of Education.
Yeah, and we actually had Janelle Holloway from Xenia community, right? Not too far from Dayton. She actually gave her testimony. You guys have heard us talk about the Darren Glines case and YMCA. She was one of the women that was exposed to this guy. Did a great job giving her testimony, well received. It was just an all-around good day. Yeah,
so to have Betsy DeVos here and all these athletes from all over the country, and then somebody from Xenia, from Ohio, talking about, hey, this issue's happened here. And I think that was, again, one of these things that really popped out in the rally is, a lot of folks want to try to marginalize this. I remember Representative Jenna Powell in the video, we did sort of mini documentary we shot about the story of House Bill 68, where some of the Democrats went up to Jenna during a floor session and said, "Oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're making this issue bigger than it is." And what we see is that this issue is everywhere, right? It's even in Xenia, Ohio, one of the most conservative counties in the country, in Greene County there.
Yeah, it can. And for those of you all listening, I'm gonna just use this as a plug. You all, you can't know how important your voices are here around the State House. We can bring up, and this has happened. I've been in rooms where we talk about some very serious topics. I mean, like Xenia. We've got a little girl, 14 years old, 2 14-year-olds, exposed to a guy who we know is a known predator. Mm-hmm. This is serious stuff, right? But as soon as you start talking about him being overweight, and there's a flap that covers his, genitalia, then everybody gets the giggles. And until you start hearing the testimony of these kids, the testimony of these families, of these mothers, then it brings a very real face. And that's a story that actually came up in a hearing 2 weeks ago with House Bill 245 in committee, right? So it impacted a representative so much so that it came out in the hearing, and it was very impactful.
Well, and actually, Dave, that kind of gets to the first thing we wanted to talk about in particular. And we always try to be careful with CCV when, especially on the narrative, of getting too deep in the weeds with you. We're always trying to walk that balance of helping the listeners stay in the know of what's going on in the nation and in Ohio, but not getting so deep into all the intricacies of what it takes to pass bills and all that, because it can get pretty technical and a little boring pretty quickly.
Gross.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other side of this. But we did want to talk about this because I think what you're seeing here with House Bill 245, you mentioned another bill, House Bill 183, and remind me, 183 is what we call the bathroom bill. That's Representative Beth Lear's bill. It says no boys and girls bathrooms. Again, crazy stuff. And then 245
is cabaret bill.
Yeah,
Angie King and Josh Williams.
Yeah, so that's saying basically you can't do these drag strip shows in public spaces where children are, right? I think David made his family proud with this quote he had in the Columbus Dispatch, which was it that kids don't have money to be sticking
little
in
girls don't have money, 7-year-old little girls don't have money to stick into G-strings, right? So what is the push? What is the need for these male adult performers to be in public?
Yeah. exactly. Which is a great question, David. I mean, there's your campaign for us. But you have these two bills which are starting to have broad support. If we were to go around and we do what's called a whip list, which is we go and ask members, do you support this bill or not? And we count the votes and say, hey, where are we? If we go and whip these bills, we know there's majority support in the Ohio House to pass these things. And another bill actually just made some news here locally in the paper, but this concept has been making news all over the country, which is Senate Bill 83, sponsored by dear friend of CCV, State Senator Jerry Serino, one of the strongest pro-life advocates we have out there. He's actually the chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee, and this is the bill to basically address these crazy DEI policies on campus. And it does a whole bunch of other things, but really that's the core of it, which is trying to end these DEI policies, which are stifling speech, discriminating against kids on campus, creating a really hostile environment.
Not that we can't talk about important issues.
Right, exactly. Right. But what you see with these DEI policies, they actually stop conversation from happening. And so, and this is something you've seen a lot of states pass. In a conservative state like Ohio, you'd expect us to be able to pass it. It passed out of the Senate with strong support. It's already passed out of committee, and it can't get a hearing. It can't get a final vote on the floor.
Here we are again.
And what's interesting about this, and this is where I just think for folks to understand what's happening in Ohio right now, which is interesting is I saw something that I've never seen happen before. Representative Bill Seitz, who is in leadership, right? So he's on Speaker Stevens' leadership team, actually published a letter to his colleagues publicly asking them, are you going to vote for the bill? Right? Basically doing a public whip list to some degree, which is just not how you typically see these things. Especially if you're a floor leader, you're doing this behind the scenes. You're calling members, you're keeping track, but to publish a letter that the media's picked up on now, and they're writing stories about it, just shows some of the dysfunction you see happening in Ohio. And this is where things can really get locked up, where folks look at us all the time and say, hey, Ohio's a very red state. Why don't things move? Well, it's because of things like this. And this is where, David, to your point, this is where those stories matter, right? Why was SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports, one, it took so long because of this kind of culture, but why did they ultimately get done? Because people showed up and talked about them. We're in that same spot right now. And David, what's the feeling you're getting from members down there?
Politics, right? And I always say, on the pod is that, politics is man's way of getting their needs and wants met in the context of God's government. We have our needs, right? We need children not to be exposed in public. We need children not to be threatened by naked males in their locker rooms. But then the politicians have other needs, right? And a lot of times the needs that they express in a district is not necessarily the needs that they're hearing from lobbyists at the State House. And so the excuse that we're hearing being circulated around these bills, very important bills, is that it's too confrontational to be this close to an election. And my question is like, if we know all the surveys are saying, even for bathroom bills, there's 60%, 63% support all across the country, according to USA Today poll, and we know 60 to 70% for some of these other areas. How is it not a good political move for Republicans to support these bills and protect children? What voices are they listening to where they would think this could be a negative thing to be, quote, controversial?
Right. I mean, and that's one of the things we're seeing here is that, especially on the gender stuff, right? We know on the abortion issue and on a number of other issues, it is there is a wide swath of opinions on those things. The country is still very much in alignment on this gender stuff, and especially when it comes to kids, and honestly on the universities as well. For all three of these bills we're talking about, and this is where so often you see politicians hide behind the political fear, and it's why getting folks down here and even the small amount of pressure that a handful of folks can bring really makes a big difference. Because when you come down to the State House, you get put in this pressure cooker, right? And it really is. The next time, if you ever come down to the Ohio State House, you come down to our building right across the street. There is something just both symbolic, but actually not just symbolic, but real about the way the State House is situated. Just this little rotunda, this flat big building that's towered over by all of these massive office towers that have lobbyists and the teachers unions and all the banks and law firms all sort of looming over the Ohio State House. And that pressure. You can actually see the pressure that these lawmakers are put under, and why our voice matters so much.
Yeah, so family, when you see these action alerts come out, don't just move on, right? Send the email, make the call. It's like a 60-second voicemail that you'll send to the State House. And matter of fact, you're going to hear Secretary DeVos, she was here, but who wasn't here was Riley Gaines.
Right.
But she got a hold of Rep. Josh Williams, was talking about the Xenia case, and had some footage of, or some audio of the little girl being grilled by a defense attorney about, how did you know this man was naked? That was getting 15,000 views an hour. I think right now we're at 100 and some thousand views from that video, and it's, you could just see the broad support. Especially like you say, when we're talking about kids, right? And so even this next week coming up, it is important that we hear you, that the leadership team hears you, so that we can get these important bills moved, passed on to the Senate. Yeah,
I wonder how she got that video. Anyway, next topic here, but it's very much tied to this discussion of the political pressure cooker people are under. And this actually happened a few weeks ago, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But the Southern Baptist Convention, right? The Southern Baptist Convention, just broadly, it's the largest evangelical denomination in the country.
It's second only to the Baptist-Costals.
Exactly. When you combine them all together, right? And I think from a lot of folks' perspective, that the SBC, because they have this, they're the largest denomination, and they have this large convention every year where thousands of churches come together and actually vote on different resolutions, different policies, things like that, that as a whole they either support or oppose. It is a good barometer of where evangelicalism is in America today. I a lot of times it kind of reminds me of the Green Bay Packers, because I see David's eyes glossing over here. They're the one publicly owned NFL team, right? And so a lot of they have to produce their numbers, so everyone always bases, okay, how's the NFL actually doing? And I think that's the way the SBC is in a lot of ways for a lot of folks. Neither of us, disclaimer, are Southern Baptists. Our Southern Baptist host is off doing Southern Baptist things. I don't know what that is, but
I went to a Baptist church growing up.
Not a Southern Baptist. Come on, man, get your
how you know?
Get your Baptist. But they passed a resolution basically coming out and opposing IVF. Now, as I keep an eye on our Catholic producer, Claire, who's like, yeah, it's about time we did, Catholics did this, probably centuries ago, even before IVF was a thing. They are catching up, and we should give them credit for.
Thanks to Claire.
Thanks to Claire.
They're on it.
They've caught up on the issue. But one, I think it's, the Southern Baptists deserve credit for coming out so clear on this. But I really want to, more specifically than just what they passed, I think it's important to talk about the reaction to it. Because basically, as soon as this thing was done, you had Republican leaders, Republican political consultants, commentators on Fox, all these types of people really condemn the SBC for speaking out on this issue. And more than anything, their condemnation, broader than the actual statement, was on, why are you talking about this? Why are you doing this now in an election year? And Dave, I've got a lot of thoughts on why I think this was a good thing they did this now. But where's your mind on this when you hear this kind of thing?
I love the fact that we have an entire denomination drawing a line in the sand culturally about a biblical topic. How pro-life are we going to be?
Yeah,
that's the question. And I think between now and November, when we have this major election, that's the thing that's going to be hitting a lot of our listeners, is how pro-life are you really?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, as an African American, one of the things I was challenged with growing up is that I know more African Americans who are Democrat go to church than white Republicans, but yet when it comes to these political issues, sometimes we separate that that politics stuff from our worldview and our morality. And I think that this is one of those areas too for the general population this is a pro-life issue. IVF is a pro-life stance. And some of us are okay, 15 weeks, 6 weeks. What about IVF? Like how pro-life are we going to be? How biblically based are we going to be? And they've made a decision, drawn a line in the sand, and said we're going to be pro-life all the way.
Yep, exactly. Right? And I think what's so important about this is, when you look at the SBC, and it's so funny that that most of the people that I see criticizing the SBC over this are a lot of times some of the people that say the church gets too political, and because they only view everything through a political lens. And what I've just seen on a sort of even a personal basis is because the evangelical church at large, right, has not been very clear on the ethics and the morality, all the moral problems with IVF, all the ethical problems with IVF. It's actually led a lot of folks astray, a lot of brothers and sisters in our own churches to make what I would say are sinful decisions.
Life abhors a vacuum. When we don't speak, other voices are speaking, right?
No, that's exactly right. And especially on something like this, this is emerging technology. There's so much, and this is how the enemy works. There's so much in the IVF space that really hits our hearts as Christians, right? Hits our that innate desire, that God-given desire to have children. That's a good thing, right? God tells us children are a blessing. What person wouldn't want to have a blessing from the Lord?
Fruitful and multiply.
There's so much in this that IVF appeals to us, and because a lot of evangelical churches have been silent on the issue, have not wanted to wade into this, or just not really spent the time on it, right? I think as much as anything, they've just not, their attention span hasn't been brought over to this issue. You have folks that are leaning into these procedures, leaning into this stuff. And so, I think for us, we have to recognize that our churches, and we say this all the time here at CCV, churches are not first and foremost about politics, right? Churches first and foremost are about Jesus Christ, about proclaiming the good news and seeing lives transformed. Now, transformed lives are going to care about government. Transformed lives are going to care, but they're going to care about a whole lot of other things too, especially how they're ordering their lives. And so, again, I think especially in a season like we're in right now, where you have political leaders actually trying to celebrate IVF, this is where the church needs to be the most clear on this, right? That doesn't mean you can't vote for a politician that supports IVF or things like that when you take into the equation all the other options you have on the table. But it does mean that this is a voice that we need to have.
It's got to factor in.
Exactly. And I will say, as we wrap here and get ready for our interview with Betsy, this is going to be one of those topics I'm sure is going to come up at our just announced Essential Summit. I know we've kind of teased this out on the podcast before, but today, this week, tickets went on sale for the Essential Summit. You can get them at essentialsummit.org. I'm sure there's going to be a link at ccv.org.
It's not real around here until it gets its own webpage.
Exactly. It's got its own website. Dr. Ben Carson, Dr. Larry Arnn from Hillsdale, Seth Dillon from the Babylon Bee, Oz Guinness, David Mahan might even be able to talk. I heard he might sing, do some Barry White on stage, something like
Barry
that.
White,
exactly. I mean, do you want me to say the answer to that?
Not Barry Manilow.
Exactly. You can do Barry Manilow if you want. You can do both in the same, little arrangement. But no, we're really looking forward to this.
Sound man.
Exactly.
Hit that track.
We're really looking forward to this, and we're doing it on October 3rd. In Columbus at the Columbus Convention Center. It's going to be an all-day conference leading up to the March for Life the next day. This is going to be really our keynote conference where we're bringing the body of Christ together. We'll have tracks for business leaders, for pastors, for Christian educators, for just sort of general faith in action. You don't want to miss this thing. This is going to be really a powerful time to come together and get charged up, ready to go for a huge election coming up. So go to the essentialsummit.org, essentialsummit.org, or go to ccv.org to get it, to get tickets. And we even have, if you got the email, there's a coupon code for an early registration discount. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Hey, narrative listeners. You know, Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org.
And welcome back to The Narrative. Aaron Baer, David Mahan here with a very special guest actually in the building, in the studio with us here today. Former Secretary of the Department of Education, Betsy DeVos, is with us. Actually, another keynote speaker at a CCV Gala back in Columbus last year. Grateful for you being here with us, Betsy.
Thanks so much, Aaron. It's great to be with you and David.
Yeah, and you actually are in town for a very special event we have going on. I was actually looking out my window on Capitol Square a little bit ago and saw this huge bus rolling by.
Oh, is it here already?
It's literally, it was driving around the Capitol already with all these female athletes on there that says the Our Bodies, Our Sports bus tour. Can you tell us about what this bus tour is and what's going on with it today?
Well, Aaron, it's to draw attention to Title IX and what is happening right now to the rule, the law that went into effect over 50 years ago that was meant to give women equal opportunities in their education and in their athletic pursuits. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has taken it upon themselves to rewrite, essentially, the intent of Title IX and extend it to include biological males competing with and against females on sports teams. And so this is really an effort to draw attention to that and to say this is not okay, this is not right, this is not fair, and to really encourage the average person to call their congressman to put a stop to this, and to really take back Title IX for its original intent.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've had Riley Gaines on the podcast before, and Riley's pictures on the side of the bus. But when I saw the bus go by earlier, what really jumps out to me is that there was a lot of girls on that bus, that pictures on that bus. This is bigger than just one big story, right? This is really becoming systematic.
Absolutely. This is happening in high school sports, in college sports, all across the country, and in some of the most unexpected and unanticipated places. It really came to my attention while I was in office. There were a couple of track stars from Connecticut who had essentially lost out to biological boys in their last 2 years of high school, and as a result missed out on future opportunities. And this is happening to young women all over the place. And for those who say, this is an isolated thing, it's only happening once or twice, that's just not the case. It is happening in increasing frequency. And if this rule is allowed to go forward and actually take effect the first part of August, it will fundamentally change the future of women's sports. It already is, it already has, but we need to turn it back and return the original intent of Title IX to what it is.
And that's the Selena Soul case, right, out of Connecticut. Was that her story?
Selena, yes.
Selena, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We submitted public comment on the Biden move with DHS, and thankfully, our Attorney General said not so in Ohio, right?
That's
Along
right.
with I think about maybe 10 states so far are pushing back.
That's right.
I know that's got to encourage you.
Yes, indeed. In fact, the second suit or the second case was decided yesterday, and that included the Ohio's participation. Right. So it's now up to 10 states that have been enjoined, and the judges involved have said that you're right, you do not have to enact this rule. And there's several more cases pending. So we're very hopeful on that avenue. But the Congressional Review Act is also an active process. It's been introduced in both chambers of Congress, and there's been over 30 senators that have already signed on to it. And this should not be a partisan issue by any means. It should be a unanimous consent to say, no, this rule cannot and will not go into effect.
So I'm just having flashbacks to when we passed the Save Women's Sports Act here in Ohio. But I'm also remembering back when I went to college 15, 20 years ago at Ohio University, there was a women's choir that was called Title IX. Right, was the they sang at all these different events, was a fun kind of show choir that did their things, and it was for women. And OU is a very liberal college, that kind of thing. This seems like one of these things not so long ago that the Democrats championed, that people left of center were all about Title IX. This was one of the big things they would talk about all the time. What's happened on the left that they can't even say anymore that we need to protect women's spaces and women's right to a fair field?
I truly can't answer that question because it's very I just don't get it. Yeah. I mean, you cannot say that allowing biological males to compete against women is in any way allowing women equal opportunity. Yeah. They're just incompatible.
And Secretary DeVos, I know this is a big part of this is sports, but it's also about private spaces and protecting women in private spaces. And Riley Gaines, one of our favorites around here, as Aaron said, and was just talking to her earlier today. It wasn't just that there was an issue inside the pool; there was an issue inside the locker room.
That's right.
And we're seeing issues like that across our state. Matter of fact, there'll probably be testimony actually today at the rally from someone who was actually exposed to a gentleman saying that he was a woman in a YMCA locker room. Right.
Yes, right.
And so tell me, how many states are you all hitting with the bus, and what is everybody saying?
Well, I'm not positive how many states are being covered, but it's at least a dozen or more. Wow. And it's in states where there are key individuals currently in office that have opportunity to do the right thing on these Congressional Review Act provisions. And so it really is trying to bring highlight to those who can and should make a difference in this, and make it a bipartisan, if not unanimous consent move to protect women's sports, protect women, and protect their private spaces.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would think this would be something traditionally Sherrod Brown, who has run his campaign doing events with Planned Parenthood, all of these organizations that we find pretty reprehensible, but have called themselves pro-women organizations. How is something like this not something you'd want to support?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So I do want to. There's a broader issue here, and I want to really dive into your experience at the Department of Education, and this is obviously something we're really concerned here because this issue touches on education quite a bit. When you got into the Department of Education in the Trump administration. When did you first start seeing signs of this ideology? You mentioned the Connecticut case, but when was the first time you started seeing how systematically wide this sort of worldview and political movement was happening inside the federal government?
Well, it started as soon as my first day in office, and it was evidenced in things that were on bulletin boards in the Department of Education, and I encountered this type of perspective in some of the most unexpected places, but then it became to be expected because it was so prevalent. Yeah. Starting with those that have ensconced at the Department of Education, the career, civil servants there that have for the most part an ideology that is far different than mine is, yeah. And so this has really been taking root for many, many years, and only in the last few have we really seen the full evidence of it, and how it has been insidiously moved through every level of government and into our schools.
Would you say, Secretary, that this is like a mass brainwashing of all the teachers and administrators, or is it like a really small group that is speaking for everyone else? Like, is this a courage problem, or is this a gender ideology problem?
I do think it's fundamentally a courage problem. People don't want to have to disagree with someone else about something, and they don't want to be unkind to people. I understand that. But this is not an issue that we can just turn our heads at and say, this is okay, that we're going to continue to let males participate and compete as though they were female when they're not. Right. It has so many downstream and far-reaching implications, and we're seeing it and hearing it in the stories of these young women who are courageously talking about it and getting castigated by many. I do think it's a relatively small percentage of people who really feel strongly that this is the right thing and it's okay, but it's a very vocal group, and they're very intimidating.
All the polling says 60 to 70% of America and Ohio is fed up with this.
Yeah.
So I want to dive more into just the bigger issues with the Department of Education. Obviously we have, actually before we do that, I just want to get clarity here. So with this August rule, for people who are listening to the podcast, what is the thing that they need to do now to make sure they're heard on this? What's should they be contacting Sherrod Brown, their congressman? What's the move for them?
Yes, contact your members of Congress, starting with your senators, Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance, and make sure that they are having to answer to this issue and this question. I understand that Senator Brown has sort of tried to sidestep the issue, but I encourage people to really call him out, put him on the spot, and do so with all of your members of Congress, all of the House of Representatives, members of congressmen and women, because they will go on record either supporting this Biden rule and having it enacted, or putting a stop to it. And what it really is a massive overreach on the part of the executive branch. The two judges that have already opined on this have expressed their concern over the overreach on the part of the Department of Education and the executive branch. And I hope and suspect that the cases that are pending are going to say similar things. But the reality is that until all 50 states are enjoined, it's going to go into effect somewhere unless the members of Congress say no.
And just so everyone understands, for especially Ohio listeners, you have two things happening in Ohio right now. You have this issue where you have the Biden administration trying to force this policy on us, but then you have the baseline issue of our own Ohio High School Athletic Association, which has rewritten our state rules to say boys can play in girls' sports, which is why we passed the Save Women's Sports Act, which unfortunately is blocked in state court. I won't go down all those paths right now, but we feel good we're going to win that eventually when we get up to the Supreme Court, but it's going to be a lengthy road. And that's why this is just sort of an attack on all fronts right now.
Well, and I think the thing to remember in the meantime, it's impacting young women today. Yes, right now. This is not a down-the-road issue. This is happening today. And so it's imperative that we speak up and that we encourage those who can put a stop to it to do so.
And my apologies for the graphic nature of this one, but actually in the Xenia case, the YMCA case that David just mentioned, we have the audio from the court trial where the families sued the YMCA for exposing their daughters to this nude man in there. But actually the defendants for the male actually grilled 14-year-old girls on the stand, getting them to admit that they actually didn't see his genitalias because his stomach was covering them. And so they ended up losing the case. And here's 13, 14-year-old girls on the stand. As you say, it's affecting girls right now. 13, 14-year-old girls on the stand now being in the locker room with this man, but then two, getting beat up in public by an attorney.
It's just unbelievable that we're in this situation. Like 10 years ago, we would have said, imagined. What are you talking about? How could this be?
I was in there, Secretary DeVos, and it just felt gross. For about 2 hours, it was like, wow, the fathers of these kids were in there, his parents in there. It's literally surreal. Yeah. Like, where are we living in America right now?
Yeah.
So I want to, we talked about August. I kind of want to move ahead even past November and into January.
Mm-hmm.
The belly of the beast of the Federal Department of Education as well, if not better than anybody else out there. What, at its core, and maybe we'll even pose this, but what's right about the Federal Department of Education, if there's anything, but what's broken in the Federal Department of Education that the next administration needs to look at?
Well, I frankly don't think the Federal Department of Education should exist. It was
That was my next question for you. That's great.
it was started. It was formed in 1979 as a payoff to the teachers' unions for having endorsed Jimmy Carter for president in 1976. So on his way out the door, President Carter said, I'm going to make good on my pledge, and we're going to form the Department of Education. This was over the objections of his then Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary, who said, this is not right, this is not necessary, and I think there's going to be unintended consequences. Well, we see now 40 plus years later that not only are there many unintended consequences, but the department really has become essentially a political arm for the left of center policies in our country, and it has become a place through which organizations like the teachers' unions and all of their allied organizations, we call them the alphabet soup of organizations, they wield their power, they get their resources, and they continue to have an inordinate amount of influence and, in many cases, control over what happens at the state and local level. The federal department or federal government only supplies about 8 or 9% of overall education funding. Yet the regulations and all the strings that go with that funding go way beyond. I mean, we're talking now about a regulation that has far-reaching implications. It's only one of many regulations and dear colleague letters that come out of there as though they are law, which they aren't, but they treat them like law. So the Federal Department of Education has way overstepped its bounds in way too many cases, and I think we would do well to, if there's federal government's going to spend money on education, block grant it back to the states, to the local districts, and let them decide how to best use it on behalf of the students in those states.
No, I think that's one of the big things that we talk about here all the time, which is the Department of Education. Actually, a lot of these federal agencies, HHS, a lot of times are just a funding mechanism for the left. The amount of grants they send all over the place is unreal. And to your point, a lot of folks often will say, well, we just need the school boards to step up. And what we've seen is that the federal government has basically taken control of these school boards through their superintendents and their legal counsel, because you have these school board members who are just businessmen and women, people who are living their lives. They show up at their school board meeting, and the council, the legal counsel for the school district says, hey, federal government just put out this ordinance. We have to pass this resolution tonight. And the school board member will say, well, what is this? Well, we have to vote on it, or else we're going to lose our federal funding, and we can't lose that. I mean, they literally hold these school districts hostage. So you mentioned, I want to kind of unpack that a little bit more, though, what it would look like to actually shut down the Federal Department of Education. Because, I remember when Mike Huckabee first started talking about this, and I'm sure other folks did before then, 10, 15 years ago. And it's something that we love the concept of. How would all that work if we were able to shut this down? Well,
first of all, I'm not sure that we'll have a politician elected to office that will have the fortitude to actually see that through and expend the political capital it would take to do it. Yeah. But there are ways to render the department less impactful. And I think if that was effectively implemented, starting with the block granting of funds, and ideally granting funds directly to the families that are supposed to most be helped by the federal dollars. All the Title I dollars are supposed to go to the most challenged and low-income population. And if those went directly to families to make the decisions for their kids' education and came alongside what's happening in states like Ohio and elsewhere where education freedom policies, school choice policies are being implemented, that may be the best way to render what's happening at the federal level less influential and ultimately totally unnecessary and forgotten. Yep. Now, there are two laws that have to be administered. because there are federal laws around individuals with disabilities, and then also Office for civil rights laws. But those could be done by other federal agencies. They don't have to have their own department in order to have the laws made, follow the law.
So those are in the Federal Department of Education.
The Civil Office for Civil Rights, which is where this whole Title IX issue is coming from. And then IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But that could be administered through HHS and elsewhere. I mean, it can be done. But again, you have to have the politicians in office who are willing to go to the mat to say, we can do better for our kids, we can do better for families across the country, but we need to put the power back at the local level, not in the hands of the federal bureaucracy.
I heard that you have some history with Christian education back from Michigan.
Yes,
Tell
I
us
do.
about that.
I went to Christian schools my K-12 years, the Holland Christian schools, and am grateful for that opportunity. And we've long supported, my husband Dick and I have long supported a inner city school that really was an inspiration for me to get involved with school choice, education freedom, starting when our oldest son was beginning kindergarten. It's called the Potter's House Christian School. And they're serving the neighborhood there in such a meaningful and wonderful way with K through 12 offering now. It started out just, elementary school. But there are so many great examples of schools that are working for kids. And if their families have the ability to make those choices, if the resources are there to follow the child to the school that the parent chooses, I know, Michigan doesn't have school choice laws. We have charter schools, but we don't have education freedom laws. The money doesn't follow those kids. It has to be raised by benefactors in the community. But my contention is that many more of these types of schools and opportunities will grow up when the demand is able to be satisfied as money follows the child, like it's doing, like Ohio has continued to build on and expand on. So I have great optimism for the states that have embraced education freedom and school choice. And I'm really excited about what the next 5 to 10 years are going to hold for families who are looking for something better and different for their kids.
Yeah, that we just actually, we haven't put out the press release on this yet, but we just got the numbers back. So our first school and a church we started in Westside Christian over here in the Hilltop, there's 3 Columbus public elementary schools around it, some of the worst performing school in the state. Their third grade reading guarantee passage rate was 36%, 17%, and 6%. When we launched Westside 2 years ago, it was K-2. This year we expanded to K-3. So this was our first year with a third grade, and 75% of the kids passed the third grade reading guarantee.
That's awesome.
And they did theirs. Those Columbus public schools get over $24,000 per kid. All of our kids are on the low income voucher, so they get $6,100 per kid.
Yeah.
And it really is a story of not just obviously, the school and doing a great job of pouring into these kids, but the church coming around the families, right? Mm-hmm. So this was, it's a little 200-person Baptist church, and they've just, their Awana program has more than tripled in size because now all these families are coming in, and the kids are getting breakfast and lunch every day because of a grant program. It's just a cool story of the community coming together. Right?
Great example of the opportunity developing as the policies really support those kinds of moves.
So, along with, I guess, as we wrap here, with the new administration, potentially a new administration coming in next year, what do you think on the education front should be top priority for them, and for, especially as we're talking to, we've got a big Senate race here coming up. We obviously have a big presidential race coming up. What are the things that, as we're interacting with these politicians, we should be telling them, you need to do this?
Well, I am very, very intent on helping see the federal tax credit get enacted. And that would be a great mechanism to really add some rocket fuel, basically, to what's going on in states. And there's growing support for that at the federal level. That would be a big move. I'm also very much in favor of seeing the department get, the funding for the department get block granted and getting serious about having that debate before Congress, because it could really fundamentally change the power structure there, the politicized power structure that we've been dealing with for several decades now, since the Department of Education was stood up. And then the third area is federal student aid, which is a monopoly for student lending. That needs to be changed dramatically. FSA should be run by an independent entity that is non-political, and there should be a private marketplace for student lending reestablished. That was eliminated in 2010 to pay for Obamacare. It became a monopoly of the federal government to pay for Obamacare. Not only has it not paid for 1 cent of Obamacare, but it's actually cost American taxpayers billions and billions and billions of dollars.
Well, Betsy, thanks for the time. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for, again, of all the things you could be doing, the fact that you're traveling around the country, talking about Title IX, talking about girls' sports, and their right to a fair playing field in private spaces, those types of things is just a blessing. We're grateful for you. And thanks for taking the time to join us on The Narrative.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.